Chasing Lincoln's Killer, Chapter 14. On the morning of July 6, 1865, the clock began ticking on one of the most dramatic events in the history of Washington, the climactic event of the manhunt. It had been 2.5 months since the death of John Wilkes Booth. An officer left the War Department and delivered death warrants to the defendants, Mary Surratt, David Harold, George Azarat, and Lewis Powell. They would be hanged tomorrow morning. The rapid conviction, sentencing, and execution of the Lincoln assassination conspirators concluded the trial that had lasted through May and June. 4 of Booth's helpers and henchmen, Edmund Spangler, Michael O'Laughlin, Samuel Arnold, and Dr. Samuel Mudd, received prison sentences. Booth was already dead, so 4 of the 8 conspirators who had been put on trial took center stage on execution day. The soldiers in the old Arsenal Penitentiary hurriedly constructed a scaffold, dug graves, and prepared coffins for the 4 convicts. On July 7th, the prisoners were paraded onto the scaffold. The condemned were bound and hooded. Nooses were slipped over their necks, and at 1:26 p.m., they dropped to their deaths. Lewis Powell, David Harold, and George Azarat reunited in the grave with John Wilkes Booth, together again, as they had been that terrible evening of April 1865, when the chase for Lincoln's killer began. Epilogue. In 1869, President Andrew Johnson released the body of John Wilkes Booth to the assassin's brother Edwin, who had him buried quietly in the family's plot at Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore, Maryland. He lies there still, but no headstone marks his grave. Edwin Stanton continued to serve as the Secretary of War during the difficult time of Andrew Johnson's presidency. Johnson tried to fire him, but Stanton refused to surrender his War Department offices. General Ulysses Grant became President Grant in 1869 and nominated Stanton to the Supreme Court. Sadly, Stanton died before he could join the courts. Secretary William H. Seward and his sons survived their wounds. For the rest of his life until his death in 1872, he preferred to turn the scarred half of his face away from the camera. Sadly, 2 months after the Lincoln assassination, Seward's wife died. The following year, his daughter Fanny died from tuberculosis. Clara Harris and Henry Rathbone married, but 18 years later he went insane and murdered her using a gun and a knife, the same type of weapons Booth carried the night he killed Abraham Lincoln. Thomas Jones kept the secrets of the pine thicket until almost 20 years later. He told his tale to a writer. He later wrote his own book about his adventures with John Wilkes Booth. Lafayette Baker also published a book about the manhunt, exaggerating his role in the chase for Booth. He died in 1868. John Harrison Surratt was eventually tracked down through Canada to Europe, where he served under a false name in the Pope's army. He was chased to Egypt, captured, and in 1867 brought back to America for trial. In 1868, after a trial failed to reach a verdict and charges were dismissed, he was released a free man. But he earned the reputation of a coward who abandoned his mother to die. Dr. Samuel A. Mudd was imprisoned in Florida, but his sentence was commuted by President Johnson, partly for assistance during an outbreak of illness in the prison. He returned to his farm in 1869. Before he died in 1883, he confessed to Samuel Cox, Jr. that he had known all along that the injured stranger at his door was John Wilkes Booth. Ford's Theater, restored in 1960s after serving as a government office building, lives again as a museum and working playhouse. Presidents come here again to attend plays, but, out of respect for Abraham Lincoln, none sits in the president's box. The restoration of the theater was meant as a tribute to Abraham Lincoln, but Ford's has also become a memorial to his assassin. If Booth could return today to the scene of his crime and visit, as 1 million visitors do every year, the basement museum at Ford's, he might conclude from what he'd found there that it was again April 14, 1865. He would find preserved in climate-controlled, shatterproof display cases the prized relics of the assassination, the original door to the president's box, its peephole still luring curious eyes, his revolvers and knives, the carbine Booth and Harold picked up on their midnight run to Surratt's Tavern, his whistle and keys, photos of his sweethearts, his pocket diary, its pages still open, as if awaiting another entry, his Derringer pistol, and, resting in its velvet-lined box, his pocket compass, which guided him during his dangerous days on the run. John Wilkes Booth did not get what he wanted. Yes, he did kill Abraham Lincoln, but in every other way, Booth was a failure. He did not inspire the South to fight on, prolong the Civil War, or win battles the Confederate Army had lost. He did not undo the Emancipation Proclamation and revive slavery. And yet, we still remember Booth to this day. But he is not the hero of the story. The real hero is Abraham Lincoln, the principles for which he lived and died, freedom and equal rights for all Americans. If Ford's Theater is Booth's place, then across the street there is a memorial to Abraham Lincoln. But many people do not even know it exists. Few visitors to Ford's cross 10th Street and climb the stairs to Peterson's house. If you go there today, you can walk to the tiny back bedroom and stand in the same place where Lincoln's family and friends once stood around his deathbed, bidding him farewell, but vowing to continue his unfinished work.